The paper in his hand felt heavier than the rifle he once carried into battle. Just a single sheet, folded with cruel precision, yet it carried the weight of a world collapsing. Foreclosure notice. Final. Vacate. The words blurred, swimming through the fog of exhaustion and rain-streaked glass as he sat behind the wheel of a truck that had seen better years. Every syllable was a hammer striking the coffin of a life he no longer knew how to hold together. He was a man built for wars that ended long ago, his broad frame now carved thinner by grief and restless nights. The short brown hair that once marked discipline now bore streaks of silver, an unspoken testimony to years that felt like centuries. His face was all edges, cut sharp by sun and sorrow, but the blue in his eyes, though dimmed, still held a flicker of something that refused to die. He wore the uniform of men who had walked away from chaos into a world they no longer recognized. Faded flannel, worn denim, boots scuffed by the grind of survival. The Montana sky had split open above him, rain hammering the windshield as if the heavens themselves were angry. Wipers clawed back and forth, but the road ahead twisted like a serpent through the pines, slick and unforgiving. Each turn jerked at his gut, pulling him deeper into the storm and the thoughts he couldn't outrun. Rock bottom had a sound, and it was the hollow silence of an 8-year-old girl strapped into the back seat. Jennifer sat still as stone, her small frame swallowed by the car seat, her eyes lost in some distant world behind the curtain of rain. She hadn't spoken in 10 months, not since the black ice stole her mother. Now, she carried her grief like a second skin, a silence so heavy it filled every room, every mile of road. She wore the red dress today, her mother's favorite, a slash of color against a world that had gone gray. A shield, a tribute, a heartbreak stitched into fabric. Richard's grip on the wheel tightened until his knuckles whitened. He was a soldier trained to fight enemies with names and faces. But this silence, this failure, it was a battle he didn't know how to win. The notice in his pocket was proof that he was losing on all fronts. His thoughts were so loud he didn't hear the tires scream until the truck fishtailed across the slick asphalt. His heart slammed against his ribs. For a breathless second, he saw nothing but rain and spinning light, and then the world snapped back. There, in the arc of his headlights, was a shape. A living shadow sprawled on the road. The brakes screamed, the truck shuddered, and when the chaos stilled, he saw it. A German shepherd. Rain poured over its thick coat, streaks of gray and white shining like steel under the flash of hazard lights. Its body lay low, one leg twisted at an unnatural angle. Instinct, old as blood, surged through him. He was out of the cab before he thought, boots slamming into puddles, rain clawing at his face. "Easy, easy," he murmured, voice pitched low, "the way you speak to something broken." He expected the fear, the snapping teeth, the desperate crawl away. That was what pain did to animals, what pain did to everything. But this dog didn't flinch, didn't cower. It raised its head and looked at him. Those eyes, God, those eyes. Not wild, not panicked, but sharp, steady, as if measuring him. The storm roared around them, and still the dog held his gaze. Its strength radiated even through the tremor of its injured leg. It wasn't asking for help. It wasn't begging for mercy. With a grunt, the shepherd rose, slow and deliberate, balancing on 3 legs. Rain slid down its muzzle as it turned, not to flee, but to face the darkness of the forest beyond the road. Then it paused, looked back. Not a plea, not a warning, something else. Command. Follow me. The message hit him like a shockwave, clear without a sound. The dog limped forward, step by painful step, disappearing into the trees that swayed and whispered like sentinels in the storm. At the edge of the headlights, it stopped and looked back again, eyes burning like twin embers in the black. Richard stood frozen, breath ragged, rain soaking him to the bone, the engine humming behind him like a distant memory. He didn't know why his boots started moving. He only knew that for the first time in months, something inside him stirred, something more powerful than despair, something he thought he'd buried with Sarah. And so, without a word, he followed the dog into the storm. Every instinct roared at him to turn back. Get in the truck. Drive away. Go back to the little girl sitting silent in the back seat. He had enough storms to fight without adding a wounded animal to the list. But the soldier in him saw something more than an injured dog. It wasn't the broken leg that held him there. It was the eyes. Calm, sharp, unyielding. There was no panic in them, no fear. There was purpose. This wasn't a lost pet crawling for shelter. This was a creature on a mission, and that realization struck something deep inside him, something he thought had died with Sarah. A sense of duty, call to action. For the first time in months, life didn't feel like a crushing weight pressing him into the ground. It felt like an objective, clear and simple, follow the dog. He looked back at the truck. Through the rain-streaked glass, Jennifer was just a small silhouette in her red dress, still as a porcelain doll. Going back meant returning to the suffocating quiet, to failure that wrapped itself around his throat like barbed wire. One step into that forest and he wasn't that man anymore. He wasn't broken. He was needed. The dog waited, rain slicking its gray and white coat, eyes locked on his. And in that gaze, Richard felt something he hadn't felt in years. A flicker of who he used to be. He drew a breath so deep it stung his lungs and took his first step off the asphalt. The roar of the storm on the truck's roof faded into 1,000 softer sounds. The whisper of wind through high branches, the patter of water sliding off pine needles, the wet crunch of his boots in the mud. Darkness pressed in like a living thing, and his phone's flashlight carved a weak, trembling beam ahead. The shepherd moved without hesitation. Richard had expected the animal to stumble, to falter under its injury. Instead, it moved like water, smooth, precise, efficient. Every step calculated, every turn deliberate. It avoided the thick underbrush, chose higher ground to skirt the worst of the mud, and never once snapped a twig louder than the rain. This wasn't random wandering. This was trained movement. Richard fought to keep up, crashing through brush that clawed at his clothes, ducking under limbs that appeared like ghosts from the dark. The ground sucked at his boots, slick with moss and hidden roots. More than once, doubt clawed at his mind. What the hell was he doing? Leaving his daughter alone in a storm, chasing a wounded animal into nowhere while a foreclosure notice iced his pocket? He was a fool. But then the light caught those eyes again. 20 yards ahead, the dog stood waiting. Always waiting, silent, patient, watching him with an intelligence that didn't belong to the wild. Richard's instincts, the same instincts that had dragged him out of hellish places half a world away, whispered the same truth. This mattered. He didn't know why, but it did. An hour passed, maybe more. The forest had no mercy. His flannel was torn, boots soaked, every muscle screaming from the fight against mud and gravity. The adrenaline had bled away, leaving nothing but exhaustion and rain pounding like nails into his skull. He was ready to stop, to curse himself for being this broken. And then the dog halted. They stood on the slope of a steep hillside. The trees here were giants, ancient pillars draped in moss, their crowns blotting out what little sky remained. Darkness pooled between their trunks like ink. At the base of one towering rock formation, the dog waited motionless, staring at the stone as if it were a door. Richard swept his light across the wall of rock, squinting through sheets of rain. Nothing, just slick stone and dangling moss. What is it, boy? His voice was a rasp in the storm. There's nothing here. The shepherd made a soft sound, low, impatient, and pressed its nose to the wall. It nudged aside a curtain of moss, revealing something that froze Richard in place. A line. Straight. Too straight. A 10-foot seam cut into the stone where no seam should be. His breath hitched. Nature doesn't draw perfect lines. His fingers traced the groove, and what he felt wasn't fracture. It was craft. He tore away more moss and saw it. A roofline. Not a crack, but a join. The beam of his light climbed higher, and the truth slammed into him like a blow. The slope wasn't a slope. It was a structure. A roof disguised as earth, thick with moss and ferns and saplings, as if the forest itself had grown to keep it hidden. He stepped back, heart hammering, and his light swept the rest of it. Walls that weren't stone, not exactly, but something darker, harder, aged and clinging to life like bone in the earth. A house built to disappear. A secret buried in roots and rain and silence. And for the first time since Sarah's accident, Richard felt his pulse quicken. Not from fear, not from grief, but from the raw electric grip of discovery. From above, this place would be nothing but wilderness, a flawless illusion. It wasn't merely hidden. It had become part of the earth, swallowed whole, wearing the forest like armor. Richard felt it in his bones. This wasn't some forgotten hunter's cabin or a relic of a vanished life. The precision of its concealment spoke of wealth, brilliance, and intent. Someone had wanted this place erased from existence, and had nearly succeeded. Ben waited at the door like a sentry, still and certain, his fur dripping silver in the storm. His nose brushed a section of wall so seamless it could have been carved from a single stone. Richard leaned in, fingers tracing until he felt it. An indentation, subtle as a whisper. He pressed. A soft hiss broke the night, like air slipping from a sealed vault. The door opened without a groan, without the ancient creak of wood. Silence. And then the scent. Not rot, not mildew, but something impossibly clean. Cool air rolled over him, tinged with cedar and the faintest trace of aged paper. It didn't feel abandoned. Felt waiting. Ben crossed the threshold first, limping but resolute. His path straight toward a hand-braided rug before a massive stone hearth. He sank onto it with the exhale of someone who had finally come home. Richard stepped inside like a man entering a cathedral. His boots barely made a sound on the polished wood floor, smooth as glass, untouched by time. The room stretched wide and open, holding itself in perfect order, like it had been preserved for inspection. A narrow bed, blanket folded with military precision. A table, 2 chairs. Shelves carved into the walls, heavy with books, physics, engineering, philosophy. Every spine aligned, every title facing forward as if expecting company. The dust was there, but only in the gentlest veil, the kind that settles in stillness, not abandonment. No Montana winter should have spared this place. No 20 years should have passed without a mark. His light fell on the desk. It was the only thing that breathed of life, not relic. No dust, no time. A leather-bound journal lay open, a fountain pen set beside it as though someone had paused mid-sentence and never returned. Richard drew closer, slow and reverent. The page spoke in crisp, deliberate strokes. October 12, 2004. The molecular lattice is finally stable. After 17 years of theory and failure, it holds. The energy density exceeds projections. A single unit, no larger than a car battery, could power a home for a year. A year. Richard's throat tightened. His eyes moved faster. The implications: we can end our addiction to oil. Clean, infinite energy. We can heal the planet. I feel like Prometheus with fire in my hands. The journal's cover bore 2 words, a Finch. He turned to the first page and read until the storm outside vanished from his mind. Dr. Alistair Finch, physicist, visionary, exile by choice. A man who had abandoned prestige to chase a dream. For pages, Richard swam through a tide of discovery, Finch's words burning with genius and hope. But then the tone shifted. March 2, 2005. A visitor today. Omniorp. Polished, polite, a suit lined with smiles. Offered to fund my research. Why would a fossil fuel giant bankroll its own funeral? April 19, 2005. The man returned. This time not a proposal but an ultimatum. Acquisition. Everything. Patents, prototypes, the lattice itself. Market synergy, strategic integration, his words. Mine were simpler. No. Richard's fists clenched as the words darkened. May 11, 2005. The mask has slipped. They pressure my suppliers. They smear my name. They don't want my work. They want it buried. Locked away so the world never sees. They don't fear failure. They fear fire. Richard shut his eyes, heart hammering. He understood now. This sanctuary wasn't just a shelter. It was a fortress against greed, a vault for an idea that could unmake empires. His gaze slid to the shelves again. One spine broke the uniform line. A second handwritten journal, thick and worn. Its title scrawled in gold ink, Sanctuary. He drew it free. This one wasn't poetry or fear. It was calculation, blueprints, sweat, and steel bound in paper. August 5, 2002. The exterior shell complete. Polymer wood composite stable beyond forecast. Mosses rooting on northern wall. 2 years from now, invisible, indistinguishable from the slope. Richard reached out, palm grazing the wall. It didn't feel like wood. Not stone either. Something between, smooth, strong, alive. He turned the page. September 14, 2003. Prototype 7 is online. Power output flawless. Climate control stable. Filtration engaged. Projection. 50 years continuous function without maintenance. This place will endure. The storm outside roared against the walls, but in here, it was as silent as the deep earth. And suddenly Richard understood why. This wasn't a cabin. It was an ark. A machine disguised as a dream. A secret buried not to be found until now. It was a revelation unfolding before his eyes. A masterpiece of ingenuity disguised as simplicity. This wasn't just a cabin anymore. It was a fortress. A sanctuary powered by the very secret it had been built to conceal. Richard rose from his chair, pacing slowly as his gaze swept over every joint, every piece of furniture. What once seemed ordinary now felt deliberate, each detail carrying the fingerprints of a mind unwilling to surrender. This wasn't decoration. It was survival, orchestrated by brilliance and desperation. His eyes drifted to Ben, who sat watching him in silence, unwavering, like a sentinel carved from flesh and bone. The dog had not made a sound the entire time, and in that stillness, Richard saw the truth. Ben wasn't just a pet left behind by a man long gone. He was a guardian, patient and loyal, holding vigil over something far greater than Richard had imagined, waiting for this moment, waiting for someone to come and understand. The technical log in Richard's hands felt heavier now, as though the words inked on those pages carried the weight of destiny. He looked down at Ben, who had risen to his feet and moved toward the massive stone fireplace. There was a deliberate grace in the way he nudged a darkened stone with his nose. Nothing happened. Then, lifting his injured paw with care, he pressed 2 others in swift succession. The silence fractured with a sound that made Richard's breath catch. A low grinding echo rising from deep within the cabin walls. Stone shifted with the groan of something ancient awakening. A section of the hearth, which Richard would have sworn was a single solid slab of granite, withdrew into the floor with mechanical precision. What it revealed made the hairs at the back of his neck prickle. A steep, narrow staircase of steel plunging into a darkness so pure it seemed endless. Cold air flowed up from the opening, sharp and sterile, carrying a whisper of ozone and chilled metal. The scent alone told Richard that whatever lay below was nothing like the rustic world above. Ben glanced back at him, eyes glowing in the dim light. An invitation and a challenge rolled into one. Then, without hesitation, the dog descended. Richard's pulse pounded like a war drum. Every instinct screamed to turn back, to seal that entrance and vanish into the safety of ignorance. But another voice rose inside him, the soldier's voice, the one that answered to duty, not fear. He drew in a slow, steady breath and stepped into the abyss. The staircase ended in a corridor gleaming under soft, motion-triggered lights. The polished concrete floor and seamless metal walls erased every trace of the cabin above. It was as if he had walked through time, from the 19th century straight into the beating heart of the future. Ben padded ahead without pause, leading him to a door so heavy it could have guarded a vault. It slid open silently at their approach. Richard stepped through and the world tilted. The room was vast, immaculate, flooded with a white brilliance that hummed against the edges of silence. Stainless steel benches lined the perimeter, crowned with instruments whose purpose Richard could only guess. Wires ran in disciplined rows across the high ceiling, every detail radiating order and intention. but it was the center of the room that stole the breath from his lungs. Encased in thick, reinforced glass, resting like relics on individual pedestals, were a dozen metallic cylinders. Prototypes, molecular batteries, their forms tracing an evolution of design, a lineage of genius laid bare. They didn't move, didn't hum, yet they radiated a silent gravity, a sense of power coiled and waiting. These were not just objects. They were the seeds of a new world. Ben approached a console embedded into the far wall and tapped a hidden panel with his nose. The air shimmered as a holographic display blossomed above the station, a glowing schematic of the entire facility. Richard moved closer, transfixed. The lines and grids revealed a truth that struck him cold. What lay beneath this unassuming cabin wasn't a basement. It was an empire buried in the earth, a sprawling labyrinth of steel and silence. His fingers hovered over the glowing diagrams as he explored the files. One was labeled Sanctuary Defense Systems. He opened it, and the air filled with blueprints and technical notes. Layers of protection unfolded before him. The walls were interlaced with a dense metallic mesh, a Faraday cage woven through the structure, sealing it in a cloak of absolute invisibility from any electronic detection. No signal in, no signal out. Another schematic revealed the climate control system, pipes plunging hundreds of feet into the earth, siphoning stability from a geothermal spring. The constant temperature of the deep earth regulated the lab, dispersing excess heat so far below that no satellite, no thermal scan, could betray its presence. Thermal cloaking, perfect and undetectable. He scanned further. Acoustic dampening panels layered into every wall and corridor, swallowing vibration, erasing sound. Even the hum of the machines was trapped, smothered before it could escape. No stray echo, no accidental trace. Finch had not left this to chance. He had built perfection brick by invisible brick. Richard stepped back, his breath unsteady. This wasn't a hideout. It was a stronghold, an unassailable bastion born from the mind of a man who had seen the storm coming and refused to bow. Finch hadn't run. He had dug in, fortified his vision against a world too blind to see its worth. What surrounded Richard now wasn't just science. It was defiance, a fortress for a future the world wasn't ready to hold. And standing there, wrapped in the quiet hum of a war fought in shadows, Richard understood something with brutal clarity. These secrets weren't just revolutionary. They were dangerous, so dangerous that a man had built an empire beneath the earth to guard them. And now Richard stood in its heart. Richard's eyes shifted from the glowing blueprints to the silent prototypes standing like sentinels, and then to the gray and white dog at his side. In that moment, it hit him, Ben wasn't just guarding a forgotten place. He was the keeper of something far greater, something powerful enough to alter the fate of humanity. Without a sound, Ben turned and guided him back through the dripping forest, paws moving with purpose. The path felt different now. Shorter, lighter, as if the forest itself had accepted his presence. The storm had broken, and through the dark canopy, thin ribbons of gray dawn began to spill. When they reached the road, Richard's truck sat waiting like a relic from another life, steel and rust in a world that no longer felt familiar. Jennifer was still curled up in the back seat, her face peaceful, unaware of the storm he now carried inside. Richard knelt beside Ben, resting a hand on the dog's thick, warm fur. "I'll be back," he whispered, unsure if it was a promise to the animal or to himself. Ben looked at him with eyes that seemed to understand everything, then slipped into the shadows of the forest without a sound. The drive home felt unreal, like moving through a dream. The foreclosure notice lying on the passenger seat seemed laughable now, a problem from a life that no longer existed. He was no longer just a man struggling to survive. He was the bearer of a secret that could rewrite history, and that weight pressed down on him harder than any burden he had ever known. He dropped Jennifer off at Mrs. Gable's, the elderly neighbor who welcomed her with worried eyes. She glanced at Richard's soaked clothes, his drawn face, but asked no questions. He muttered something about a long night shift and promised to return later for some sleep. But sleep? That was impossible. Back at his small, quiet house, the silence didn't feel the same anymore. It wasn't just the emptiness of grief. It was the silence of something vast, something hidden. He sat down in front of his old, sluggish laptop, mind spinning with the fragments of Finch's journals. He needed answers. He needed to understand what he was up against. He typed in the name, Dr. Alastair Finch. The results were thin, academic papers from decades ago, heavy on theoretical physics, brilliant but obscure. A grainy photograph surfaced from an old university site. A man with wild graying hair and kind eyes that hinted at a restless mind. And then, nothing. Around 2004, the trail vanished completely. Finch had erased himself. Next, Richard searched Omnicorp. The difference was staggering. A tidal wave of corporate gloss, sleek websites, polished propaganda, images of gleaming solar fields, smiling executives shaking hands under banners of sustainability. They branded themselves as champions of a green future, but Richard could taste the lie in his throat like bile. These were the wolves who had tried to bury Finch's miracle to protect their empire. Wolves dressed in the wool of good intentions. What Richard didn't know was that hundreds of miles away, in a sterile, humming data center, something stirred. For 20 years, an AI, quiet, relentless, had scoured the web for any mention of its creator. For 2 decades, the string Alastair Finch physicist Montana had lain dormant. Until now, a red alert pulsed on a screen. A low-traffic IP address in the Montana mountains had just searched the name. A ghost had woken. Within minutes, a terse, encrypted directive flashed across a secure channel. Investigate. Discreetly. And just like that, the hunters began to move. Richard closed the laptop, the unease in his gut deepening. He felt like he had just tapped a hornet's nest with his bare hand. Later, when he picked up Jennifer, he forced a smile that didn't reach his eyes, tried to slide back into their quiet rhythm of shared meals and muted grief. But everything felt different now. The air itself seemed sharp, dangerous. The first time he saw the black sedan, he brushed it off, parked a couple of blocks from his house. Ordinary. Forgettable. The next day he saw it again. This time at the grocery store, 3 rows away, facing his truck. His instincts, long buried beneath years of civilian life, began to wake. His senses sharpened. Every reflection in a window, every car 2 lengths behind on the road, he cataloged them all. That old, familiar feeling crept over him. The one he knew from hostile ground. You're being watched. 3 days later, doubt became certainty. He was waiting in the line of cars outside Jennifer's school when he saw it. The same black sedan parked across the street. A man in the driver's seat pretending to scroll through his phone, but his eyes weren't on the screen. They were locked on the school doors. They were locked on Jennifer. A cold, savage fury ignited in Richard's chest. This was the line. This was war. He swallowed the fire, forcing himself into that calm, surgical focus he had learned in combat. Jennifer climbed into the truck, her bright red dress a small blaze of innocence. He buckled her in, his movements steady, hiding the storm brewing inside. But as he pulled away, his eyes flicked to the rearview mirror. The black sedan pulled out, keeping a measured, professional distance. Richard's grip tightened on the wheel. He understood now. He had gone looking for a ghost, and in doing so, he had invited the hunters to his door. The war Finch had warned of wasn't a story in some forgotten journal anymore. It was here, and it was just beginning. The drive home was the longest 10 minutes of his life. Every headlight felt like a threat. Every shadow hid an enemy. In the rearview mirror, the black sedan lingered like a predator gliding just beneath the surface. Richard's gut told him this wasn't coincidence. It was the calm before the strike. He eased into the driveway, masking the storm inside with a performance of normalcy. He lifted Jennifer from the truck, carried her into the house, every sense alive to the weight of unseen eyes. Whoever they weren't just looking anymore. They were closing in. That night, he made his choice. They couldn't stay. These weren't amateurs. They were trained, patient, and relentless. And now they had crossed the only line that mattered. They had watched his daughter. A soldier's first oath is to protect what matters. So he would. Midnight swallowed the street in rural darkness as he moved through the house like a shadow. Hours of preparation had gone into this moment. A small duffel for Jennifer with clothes, water, her battered teddy bear, and food that would last. He knelt beside her bed, his chest tight as he watched her sleep, her face soft and untouched by the danger pressing in on them. "Time for an adventure, sweet pea," he whispered gently. Her eyes opened, trusting, wordless, and she let him dress her without question. He told her it was a special camping trip, just the two of them. She only nodded. He led her through the back door, across the overgrown yard, slipping over the low fence into the woods. The escape route had lived in his mind for years, a remnant of old instincts he thought he'd buried with the war. They moved like ghosts through the trees, his steps guided by a map etched in muscle memory. A quarter-mile away, the truck waited in silence, parked long before night fell. When the road opened before them, Richard felt the first breath of relief. They were gone before the watchers even knew the hunt had begun. The highway stretched ahead under a canopy of stars, but peace never came. His senses burned on high alert, eyes scanning every shadow in the mirror. Jennifer slept curled in a blanket, her small face serene in the pale dashboard light. He gripped the wheel tighter, his mind replaying Finch's words, the ghost of a dead man leading him into this storm. Was he saving her, or losing himself? Hours later, he pulled off onto the same hidden turnoff as before, the mountains rising like black sentinels against the night. This time, the forest wasn't a maze of uncertainty. Every step was deliberate. He carried Jennifer in his arms, her breath warm against his neck, and pushed deeper into the dark. When the camouflaged shape of the shelter emerged, something large shifted from the shadows. Ben. The name was barely a breath. The dog approached without sound, his great head low, tail still, offering no growl, no bark, only a low whine of recognition. He sniffed Jennifer's dangling feet, then lifted those steady eyes to Richard. He understood. He had been waiting. Richard lowered Jennifer as he worked the concealed latch on the door. She blinked in the dim light, her small face drowsy but curious. Then she saw him, the enormous gray and white figure standing like a statue. For months, she had been locked inside herself, a silent walled city. Now she simply stared, tilting her head with quiet wonder. Ben didn't move. He let her look, let her decide. And then, with a slowness that made Richard's breath catch, Jennifer lifted her tiny hand. She didn't reach to touch, not yet. She just offered it. Ben stepped forward, silent as mist, and pressed his cold nose gently into her palm. Her fingers curled, brushing fur. That was all. But in that moment, something invisible shifted. A bridge built from silence. Richard swung the door open, and a wave of warmth spilled into the night. He led her inside, and as the light bloomed against the wooden walls, he saw her eyes widen. Not in fear, but in awe. For the first time in almost a year, her gaze held life. She wandered the room like she'd stepped into a storybook, drinking in the bookshelves, the soft lamplight, the braided rug by the hearth. And then she crossed the floor and sat down on that very rug, small legs folding neatly. Ben followed, settling a respectful distance away, his massive head lowering to his paws, his amber eyes fixed on her with quiet devotion. Richard stood frozen, afraid to move, afraid to breathe. He'd brought her here to protect her body. But this place, this sanctuary was reaching something deeper, healing something he thought was beyond repair. Jennifer reached out again, bolder now, and laid her hand on Ben's thick coat. Her fingers moved slowly, stroking him in a rhythm as ancient as trust itself. Richard's throat tightened, his vision blurred. Then, without warning, she looked up at him. And in the silence between heartbeats, it happened. Her lips parted. A sound came, fragile and rough from disuse, but achingly clear. His name is Ben. Isn't it, Daddy? The words broke him. He couldn't speak. He just nodded, tears hot against his face, his knees weak under the weight of something too big for breath. His daughter was back. The fortress had saved them both. And as the first gray light of morning crept across the floorboards, Richard woke to a sound he thought he might never hear again. The sound of his daughter's laughter drifted through the room, light and melodic, like sunlight breaking through storm clouds. He lay still on the narrow cot, eyes closed, letting that sound fill the hollow spaces inside him. For the first time in nearly a year, the silence was gone. No more suffocating quiet, no more loneliness clawing at his mind. Just Jennifer's bright voice, weaving life back into the world. Soft morning light spilled through the tall windows, vines curling around their frames, painting the wooden walls in hues of green and gold. Jennifer sat cross-legged on the floor, her small hands busy stacking pine cones into a wobbly little tower. Beside her, Ben sprawled like a sentry at rest, his head on his paws, dark eyes half-lidded in contentment. Every now and then, he rumbled deep in his chest as she explained her masterpiece to him in that serious, childlike tone. Richard watched quietly, something warm and unfamiliar spreading through his chest. Peace. He hadn't felt it since Sarah died. He didn't move, didn't speak. Just let the scene etch itself into memory. A father rediscovering the sound of his child's joy. Jennifer leaned against Ben as if he were an oversized pillow, her little fingers combing through the thick fur around his neck. She whispered a secret in his ear, and Ben's ear twitched as if he understood. That's when she found it. Her voice cut through the stillness, curious and surprised. Daddy, Ben has a necklace. Richard sat up, his heart skipping. Jennifer was tugging at something buried deep in the dog's coat. A dark metallic band almost swallowed by fur. Ben didn't flinch. He stayed perfectly calm, a model of patience, as Jennifer worked it loose. When she finally held it up, Richard's stomach dropped. It wasn't a necklace. It was a collar, solid, flat metal blackened with age, heavy in her small hands. She brought it to him. It has writing, she said softly. He took it, feeling the unexpected weight, and wiped a thumb across the tarnished surface. Letters emerged in elegant script, faint but clear enough to read under the morning light. His breath caught. Ben, faithful companion to Alastair Finch. Born 2003. The words slammed into him like a physical blow. Born 2003. His mind scrambled for reason, for math that could make sense of this. 22 years. It was August 2025. 22 years old. And yet Ben stood there, strong, lean, eyes sharp, muscles like coiled steel. Prime animal, not a relic of age. It was impossible. And yet, here he was. Richard's pulse thundered in his ears. His gaze shifted from the collar to the dog, who sat watching him with those impossibly intelligent eyes. And then he understood. Finch's genius. It hadn't stopped at energy or engineering. It went further, much further. He pulled Jennifer into his arms, pressing a kiss to her hair. Sweetheart, he said, forcing calm into his voice. Stay here with Ben for a bit, okay? She nodded, distracted by her pine cones. Richard didn't wait. He bolted down the steel staircase into the lab, the collar cold in his grip. Holographic displays bloomed to life as he slammed his hand on the console. His mind raced. He skipped past physics files, past schematics, searching for something else, biology, medicine. A folder appeared, labeled simply, Project Guardian. Locked behind encryption. His hands hovered over the keys, desperation clawing at him. And then he felt it, a presence at his side. He turned. Ben stood there, silent, watching him. Without warning, the dog lifted a paw and tapped the physical console. A precise sequence of keys. The folder unlocked. Richard stared, speechless, as text filled the air in front of him. Finch's private log. His most guarded secret. Richard's hands trembled as he scrolled. October 28, 2003. Found him today. Pup by the creek. 8 weeks old, sick, dying. Vet says he won't last the year. A rare disorder, cells breaking down too fast. I can't let him go. November 15, 2003. An idea dangerous and unthinkable. My energy tech stabilizes molecular bonds for storage and release. What if I could do the same in living tissue? Correct the replication errors, stop the decay. Stop aging. It's wrong. Monstrous. But the alternative is losing my only friend. February 4th, 2005. The treatment works. Regeneration stable. Ben's aging has halted at peak condition. Indicators suggest permanence. I've saved him. Given him a lifespan I can't predict. Side effect: neural efficiency beyond expectation. His cognition, astonishing. He is more than a dog now. Richard sank into the chair, the weight of it crushing him. This wasn't just a loyal animal. Ben was a living miracle, a breakthrough that could obliterate disease, erase mortality itself. A secret that could change everything and destroy everything. A faint pulse of red light caught his eye, a silent warning blinking on the console. Ben saw it too. The calm melted from him in an instant. Muscles tensed, ears sharp. Every line of his body coiled like a spring. He moved fast, nudging a different panel with his nose. The holographic display shifted, filling with images, live feeds from hidden cameras across the perimeter. Richard's stomach turned to ice. 3 black SUVs crawling through the forest. Heavy-duty, armored. Men spilling out, faces masked, rifles glinting under the canopy. They moved with precision, fanning out like a hunting pack. They weren't guessing. They weren't searching. They knew. They were coming straight for them. The morning shattered like glass. The peace that had wrapped itself around them was gone, ripped apart by the reality on the screens. The hunters were here. Richard stared at the images, his heart pounding, then turned to the silent guardian at his side. Ben stood like carved stone, steady and ready. The war had come to their door. Cold panic gripped him, sharp and merciless. And in that moment there was only one thought in his mind: Jennifer. He scooped her up from the floor, her little body trembling as if she could feel the storm gathering around them. "It's okay, sweet pea," he whispered, forcing calm into his voice even as fear clawed at his throat. "We're just playing a new game. Quiet hide and seek." Ben was already moving, a shadow gliding through the narrow hall, purposeful and unshaken. Richard followed as the German Shepherd led them to a section of the compound he hadn't seen before, a corridor hidden behind the main lab, ending in a door that looked like it belonged on a vault. It slid open with a hiss, revealing a smaller chamber, stark and fortified. This was no simple refuge. This was the fortress's heart. The walls were steel, thick and unyielding, and at its center stood a massive console, its screen still alive with ghostly images of the outside world. Richard set Jennifer down in a padded alcove, tucking her in with the teddy bear from her bag. He crouched to meet her wide eyes. "You stay with Ben," he said softly. "You're safe here." Then he turned to the monitors, and the sight froze his blood. The men outside moved with a precision that only came from years of training. These weren't common thugs. This was a military unit, professional, efficient, lethal. And then he saw her. She stood apart from the others, poised in an immaculate business suit, a dark silhouette against the trees. The wilderness didn't belong to her, but she commanded it with her presence alone. Even from the grainy feed, Richard could see the steel in her posture, the hard lines of her face. Late 40s, hair pulled back with surgical precision. Her expression, cold, sharp, carved from stone. A voice crackled over the speakers, sharp and impatient. "Alpha team in position on the north side. No entry points visible." "Scanners?" she asked, her tone clipped, the command in it absolute. "Negative, ma'am. Thermal is flat. No heat signature. Same as the ground. No EM emissions, no radio signals. It's a dead zone." For a moment, the woman pressed her fingers to her temple, as if summoning patience. Richard remembered her name from Finch's files. Taylor. Omnicorp's iron hand. The one who had haunted Finch's notes. The shadow behind his paranoia. "I don't care what your scanners say, Captain," she said, each word a scalpel. "The intel that cost us 10 million says that structure is the entrance. It is not a rock. Find a way in. Now." On screen, Alpha Team began their assault. Bars screeched against the doorframe, sparks spitting as they tried to pry it open. Decryption tools hummed, sniffing for a lock that wasn't there. The fortress remained silent, invisible, perfect. But Richard felt no relief. They wouldn't stop. People like Taylor never stopped. Jennifer crept closer, her voice barely a whisper as she pointed to the screen. "She's the bad people, Daddy." "Yes, sweet pea," he murmured, eyes locked on Taylor's face. "She is." And then Taylor's mask cracked. Her patience snapped like brittle glass. She touched her earpiece, voice sharp enough to cut air. "I'm done waiting. This asset has been in the wind for 2 decades. I am not leaving empty-handed. Prep the breaching charges. If we can't open the door, we'll take it off the hinges." Richard's stomach lurched. They were going to blow it. All of it. Finch's creation, the sanctuary, the miracle reduced to rubble. Just to claim what was inside. His hands clenched, rage burning through helplessness. He was trapped. Jennifer was trapped. And then Ben moved. Silent, swift, with purpose. The dog padded to an unmarked section of the console, his paw pressing a sequence only he knew. A new screen blinked to life, washing the room in pale light. Richard turned and felt his breath hitch. This wasn't surveillance. This was war. Schematics spread across the screen, ventilation grids, internal systems, defense protocols. Not passive walls, but weapons. Non-lethal gas dispersal points threaded through the ducts. Electromagnetic pulse emitters buried deep in the earth. A fortress designed not just to hide, but to fight. The interface wasn't a wall of code. It was clean. Intuitive. Finch had built this for a soldier. For someone like him. Ben's eyes locked on his, steady, unyielding. The message was clear without a sound. "He built this for you. I am the guardian. But you are the commander." Richard's hand hovered over the controls, shaking. On the main screen, Alpha Team worked like machines, slapping heavy charges against the cabin door. A timer glowed in the corner of their HUD. 60 seconds. He stared at it. 60. 59. 58. He looked at Jennifer, curled in the alcove, her tiny face glowing in the monitor's light. Trust shining in her eyes. Trust that he wouldn't fail her. 14 seconds. His chest tightened, his breath shallow. Soldier or father. Hide or fight. The weight of it crushed him. He turned to Ben, his voice low, steady now. "Protect her. No matter what." Ben rumbled deep in his chest. A sound like distant thunder. Eyes never leaving Jennifer. And Richard climbed the stairs. Each step heavy with the choice he had made. The timer burned in his mind as he gripped the latch and swung the cabin door open. Cold night air hit his face like a slap. And beyond it, chaos. Tactical lights slicing through the dark. Shadows moving with guns raised. The hunt had reached its end. The team leader spun around. Weapon raised. Shock etched across his face. "Hold your fire," he ordered sharply. Richard stood firm, hands raised, palms open to show he carried no weapon. One man in a flannel shirt against an entire squad of armored soldiers. That was his advantage. They would never see him as a threat. "Call off your men," Richard said calmly, his voice steady as stone. "Leave this place. You have no idea what you're walking into." The leader's earpiece crackled. A woman's voice came through, sharp as a blade. "Ask his name. Identify yourself," the leader demanded. "My name is Richard Anderson," he replied evenly. "And you're trespassing." A pause. Then the voice returned. Smooth, condescending, dripping with authority. "Mr. Anderson, a squatter in possession of stolen corporate assets. You have 5 seconds to surrender and give us access to the facility. This is not yours. It belongs to Dr. Finch." Richard let out a cold laugh. "Dr. Finch is dead. A ghost." But then came the twist of the knife. "I know your daughter is in there. A tragedy already. Don't make it worse. Cooperate, and she stays safe. Refuse, and what happens when we breach that door will not be on us." The air froze. A threat against Jennifer. The line had been crossed. Richard's face turned to stone, eyes like shards of ice. Down below, in the command center, Ben had heard every word through the open comms. He didn't wait for an order. He didn't need one. The child under his protection had been threatened. That was all he needed to know. A paw slid across the control panel with silent precision. Above ground, the world shattered for Alpha Team. A deep hum vibrated through the earth for less than a second. Then every piece of tech they carried went dead. Rifles, goggles, comms, black. Darkness swallowed them whole, broken only by the pale moonlight and the silhouette of the man they had come to crush. Before they could even process what happened, the heavy door behind Richard slammed shut with a deafening clang, locking him out with them. Inside the lab, unseen security systems roared to life. They would never know it yet, but every path into the facility was sealed. Then came the hiss, soft, sinister, gas curling from vents hidden along the cabin's foundation. Gas! Get back! The leader shouted, clawing for a mask he couldn't see. Too late. Finch's masterpiece worked fast, odorless, merciless. Their breaths grew ragged, movements sluggish. Trained soldiers reduced to stumbling silhouettes. And into that chaos, the ghost arrived. A silent panel slid open in the rock face. From it stepped a creature born of shadow and steel, a blur of gray and white moving like liquid death. No growls, no snarls, just cold precision. One sharp crack, rifle gone. A man hit the ground before he even realized the weapon wasn't in his hands. Another soldier spun too slow, his sidearm torn away by jaws that didn't even break the skin. This wasn't a fight. It was dissection. 10 seconds. That was all it took. An elite team of killers lay unconscious on the forest floor, their weapons scattered like toys. Richard stood motionless, watching the storm unfold in silence. Then he turned and walked back to the door, which opened like a loyal servant, sealing him back inside the fortress. On the main monitor, one camera feed still glowed, a hardwired line no EMP could touch. It framed Taylor's face, lit by the glow of her tablet. She stared, jaw clenched, fury burning like wildfire in her eyes. Her army had vanished like smoke, and she didn't even know how. Richard walked past her image without a word, past Jennifer, safe now in Ben's protective shadow, and entered the lab's heart. At the back stood what looked like a wall of solid steel. The vault, Finch's final sanctuary. Taylor was still watching. He wanted her to. He laid his palm on the recessed panel. Not a keypad, a biometric seal tied to something more than flesh. It read the worth of a soul. Richard thought of the words in Finch's journal, the first line he ever read. For the betterment of all humanity, he said aloud, voice steady. Then they were gone, leaving behind nothing but the whispering forest and the pale light of dawn. 6 months later, the ghosts were gone too. No foreclosure, no debts, no darkness. Richard and Jennifer lived in a small home nestled in a quiet valley beyond the mountains. A new life, a true life. Her laughter filled the halls now, a sound he thought he'd never hear again. The red dress she once wore like armor was now a banner of joy. In a converted barn behind the house, real work was being done. The Finch Legacy Foundation, a name no one questioned, sent hope into the world piece by piece. Richard watched as Jennifer, steady hands and a bright smile, finished testing a compact purifier no bigger than a shoebox. Could pull water from poison and make it pure, running on a sliver of Finch's dream. This one's for Peru, right, Daddy? That's the one, sweet pea. They didn't change the world with headlines. They changed it in whispers. A clinic lit where there was only darkness. A village saved from cholera. A life extended because one man chose to protect instead of surrender. That evening, the three of them sat on the porch, Richard, Jennifer, and Ben, the eternal guardian, finally at peace. The sun bled gold and crimson across the Montana peaks. Are you happy, Daddy? She asked softly. Richard looked at her. The bright eyes, the fearless heart. He thought of the man he was that night in the storm, lost and broken. He thought of the shadow that became his savior, and the choice that pulled him from death into purpose. Yes, he whispered, his voice thick with truth. I am. And as the last light faded, a soldier, a child, and a guardian sat together in quiet triumph. Not because they escaped the storm, but because they had built a dawn no storm could ever touch.